Brilliant, Marion. Glad to have you. Thanks a lot for that. So the program for today, we'll start with the Q&A with Ruth and discussing what's important in terms of skills for job interviews and what answer can VR bring specifically to those challenges. Then we'll go to Tom, and together we'll do a little bit of a demo of the simulator. And finally, we'll talk with Marion about deployment. So the why, the how, and the what. So I will give a quick intro, starting talking to you about a study from a few years ago in the US that found that the second biggest fear of people is death. So death is number 2. Number 1 is public speaking. And what Jerry Seinfeld observed is that means that at a funeral, most people would rather be in the casket, dead, than doing the actual speech. And that relates to job interview. 93% of job interview candidates express anxiety. And so I invite you to reflect on how you in your personal life have become better at difficult conversations like job interviews, but also giving feedback, pitching an idea, having a fight, asking for a raise. We've all been there. If you think about it, what you have done, consciously or subconsciously, is to try new things every time, take feedback from the real world, sometimes in the form of success, but sometimes in the form of failure or hurt, and then adapt your behavior the next time around. And that's called learning by experience. That's what we do as human beings. The reason Bodyswaps exist and the reason why VR is interesting is we can take that idea of learning by experience, but make it a lot faster and a lot safer, like a flight simulator for soft skills. And specifically for job interview, that means that we can give students the tools and the confidence to present their best selves and get the best job, the one that they deserve, the one that they fit for. And this matters today because 61% of students, that's from a report from a few months back, 61% of students are not confident when it comes to getting a job after they graduate. And the reason for that is the world of work has changed tremendously over the past few years. We have automation, of course, the pandemic, remote working, the increase of youth unemployment, and the fact that in general, with the acceleration of technology, the half-life of a skill is much shorter. So you will have to reskill your entire life. And so for institutions, the job has changed a little bit. It's not enough to prepare students to do the job, to do a job for the rest of their life. You have to give them the transferable skills to be consistently successful in their career. And first and foremost, you have to give them a chance to get that job in the first place. Before we move to the Q&A, I want to share with you the vision statement of the Department for Education here in the UK. Our vision is to provide world-class education, training, and care for everyone, whatever their background. We will make sure that everyone has a chance to reach their potential and live a more fulfilled life. We will also create a more productive economy so that our country is fit for the future. If you think about job interview in relation to what I highlighted in orange here, the chance to reach their potential. If you want people to reach their potential, they need to be in a place where they can. And for that, they need to get the jobs that they deserve. So it is really the first step to better prepare people for job interviews. And secondly, if employers get the right employees, the ones that are fit for the job, it will ultimately create a more productive economy. So this is the big macro reason why job interview training is so important. So that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to have a Q&A with Ruth. Ruth's first question, what skills does one need to master to be good at job interviews?
Okay, so this is the million-dollar question that I've been looking into. And what I've found is that performing well in interviews is actually a really complex task. It's way more involved than just learning the perfect answer to, the top 10 interview questions, say, because interviews can be really unpredictable. There are literally hundreds of questions an interviewer could ask you. So if your strategy is going to be to learn how to answer every question verbatim, then you're going to come unstuck. So to be really great at interviews, it helps to master a technique that will allow you to answer any question that an interviewer throws at you, and in a compelling and persuasive kind of way. So it's really like putting on a prize-winning performance. And that involves all sorts of other skills like storytelling, managing anxiety, communication skills, body language, building rapport. And it's not just about saying what you think the interview wants to hear. It's also about knowing your own character strengths and non-negotiables, and being able to advocate for them in a way that connects them with the purpose of the role and the business that you're applying for. So it's a really complex skill set.
That's interesting, because there's I believe what the academic research and some of what you shared with us shows indeed that it is about so much more than just what you say. It is about how you present yourself, storytelling technique and all that. But it's easy to imagine how I would prepare the what. I go in student room, I find questions and I write down my notes. How do I prepare for all of those other skills that you mentioned?
Yeah. So I think it's one of the great ironies with job interviews that being a good match for a position doesn't necessarily require the same skill set as being great at interviews. And some people find that they just naturally have this greater affinity for interview skills than others. So especially if you're drawn to careers in areas like sales or PR or customer service, those kind of skills tend to come quite naturally. But let's say we've got a brilliant graphic designer or a software developer, or someone who's looking for a role that really doesn't need them to excel at self-promotion. They still have to go through that interview process to get the job. So the good news in this is that all of these skills can be developed and improved with practice. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept that says that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. Yeah. So this was a study by a researcher called Ericsson that became popular in the 90s. And what Ericsson studied violinists at a Berlin Music Academy, but it's since been validated in all sorts of other disciplines. And what Ericsson found was that the key difference between the most capable and the least capable performers wasn't actually a natural affinity or a talent. It was actually the number of hours that they spent practicing their craft. But to be clear, when we talk about practice, we're not talking about simple repetition. We're actually talking about purposeful practice.
So what's the difference between dumb practice and purposeful practice?
So purposeful practice is it's what comes from effortful activity that has been designed to improve a skill, which can involve a lot of things. But in brief, I like to think that it has three key parts. So the first part is studying success. So you're not just learning through trial and error, but you're actually studying the methods and techniques used by the leaders in the field. The second part of this is about learning through your mistakes, through quality feedback. So this is the kind of feedback that allows you to identify places where you're going wrong, and to build a self-awareness of the things that you're doing, and then to be able to identify what you can do in order to improve that skill. And then the third part of this is about building a sense of competence and accomplishment, which is it's a really important factor in motivation and in giving you the confidence that you need to be able to really push yourself beyond your comfort zone in order to improve.
So am I correct? One is studying success, modeling good behavior. Second one is getting feedback that you can actually apply, and the second one is about building that sense of confidence in the fact that you're ready to do this. Correct?
Yeah. So it's actually that third one. I think it's something that often gets overlooked in learning design because it's not actually about getting things right. It's about building the confidence to fail, basically,
right,
so that you can then learn from those mistakes.
And so you mentioned you started by the idea that it's not about what you say, it's about so many more skills. And now you touched on what practice must do when recovering those skills to really bring people to peak performance, so to speak. How does VR play a unique role? What does VR bring as answers that you may not have had with previous learning technologies?
Okay, so there were some really useful resources available for practicing job interview questions. So like there are video tools that you can watch videos of employers talking about why they ask particular questions and what they're looking for in a candidate, and then you can video yourself answering the questions, play it back, share it with other people, fine-tune your performance. But what VR gives you is something that is really quite difficult to replicate in other media, and even in real life sometimes. So if I can bring that back to those 3 points that we were talking about earlier about purposeful practice. So we've got this first point about studying success, and what makes VR so compelling is that sense of presence, of existing in a space with another, albeit a virtual person. So rather than simply watching a video of someone demonstrating a good interview technique, in VR, the learner genuinely feels like they're sitting in the interview room with that person. And what's more, they can interact with that person, and we can use the characters and the environment to actively coach the learner in the techniques that we want them to master. And then the second part of that about the learning through mistakes. So now this is where VR really excels beyond even face-to-face training, and the benefits here are twofold. So unlike traditional role play, where people can, they can often feel self-conscious and be afraid of humiliating themselves in front of their peers. In VR, we can create this unthreatening, psychologically safe space where they can experiment and they can try out different ideas without fear of judgment. And secondly, the level of feedback that you get in VR is completely unbeatable, because in VR, we can analyze all sorts of aspects of semantic, verbal, non-verbal behaviors, and we can use that to give learners really personalized, detailed, nuanced feedback, and in real time, so that really only a really highly trained kind of human observer could replicate. But also, because soft skills they feel quite personal by nature, we often conflate feedback about our soft skills with kind of personal criticism. So it can be really hard to hear it from another person without feeling, hurt or defensive. And in VR, we can present this data as pure analytics, so that not only are we helping the learner to become more self-aware of their behaviours and performances, but we can also help them to coach themselves to improve. And just to finish off quickly, I'm talking quite a lot.
That's all right.
Coming back to the last point about competence. Now, so this kind of relates to what I was saying earlier about how interview skills can be completely disconnected from people's actual work skills. So we're not talking about being competent at the job that you're applying to do. We're talking about job interviews. And this sense of competence is a really difficult thing to hold on to if you're in a competitive jobs market and you have to experience lots of rejections en route to getting your job. So the results from our own studies on this are really interesting. So we've run pilots now with hundreds of students at multiple colleges. And what we've found is that 74%, I think it was, of students who completed job interview training in VR reported an increasing confidence in their
Yeah.
job skills. So we're confident that VR can help with that.
Well, thanks a lot, Ruth, for that. And indeed, I mean, everyone on this panel everyone has had a first job interview in their life and probably remembers it. It was most likely a very difficult moment. You're in front of a stranger asking you difficult questions, and judging you on the spot, and you're in competition with other people. I mean, this plays into so many insecurities, especially when you're young. So that aspect of building confidence through self-awareness by knowing how good you are because you've experienced it is indeed powerful. What I'm going to do now that we've talked about VR kind of in theory around job interview skills is we're going to go a little bit deeper now, have a look at what we did to try and apply some of those principles. I'm going to share my screen one more time. Give me a thumbs up if you can see that. We're good? Okay. Thanks, Marion, for following the instructions. So taking a little step back about how we came up with Bodyswaps and where it comes from. There's an entire body of academic research that's been really growing since 2005 around embodiment and behavioral change. So embodiment in virtual reality is, you have the headset, you have the controllers, and embodiment is when you have a body. So you can see your virtual hands, you can see your virtual body. And when you move in the real world, your hands, for example, they move exactly the same in virtual reality. That's important because that means it's an experience that's happening to you. But because you're in virtual reality, nothing is real. So in VR, you can die. So you can embody a character dying. You can embody a character of a different genre, different race, different age, different size. And that opens up, obviously, amazing things. And there's one particular experience that was particularly instrumental, which is from 2016, from Mel Slater and his team, where he worked with 15 women suffering from depression. And he created an 8-minute scenario in which each of those women would find themselves, so as you can see in figure A, quite old school VR tech, but they would find themselves in VR in front of a mirror and a little girl crying. And their job is to just speak for a minute or two and say nice things to that little girl. And that's it. There's no AI, and the graphics are what they are. And after a minute or two, when they're ready, they would body swap and find themselves in the body of the little girl with a different, smaller perspective, and listen back to their avatar. So you can see the avatar here will have their body language and their voice. And what they found is in all 15 women, 4 weeks after doing the experience 3 times, so 3 times 8 minutes, 25 minutes in total, there was a sustained decrease in self-criticism, a sustained increase in empathy towards oneself. And so what you have here is it's a discovery, there's no other words for that you can use virtual reality to do things that you cannot do in real life, obviously body swapping, to really trigger deep behavioral change. And so what we did after that with Ruth and other learning designers and behavioral scientists was to take those new opportunities offered by VR and merge them with principles of learning design to really create an approach. And so I'll go fast because a lot of things has been covered by Ruth, but one principle of learning design is bring emotions into learning. This is reinforced in virtual reality by the fact that you're embodied. And that means super high emotional engagement in VR. The second aspect is application. You want people to do things, not just be passive when they learn. This is reinforced in VR by the immersion. You are in an environment that looks like the environment where you're going to apply your skill. And that means that you're not role-playing, you're not pretending to be somewhere else, pretending to be someone else. You are yourself. The third element is exploration. If you have linear learning, people get bored and they disconnect. If they can explore, try stuff, make mistakes, learning sticks. This is reinforced in VR by the freedom to fail. When you're in VR, no one is observing you, you're alone, right? You're talking to characters who are artificial intelligence, so they have no feelings. It's okay if you hurt their feelings. And you can really explore, and that's psychological safety is very important. And finally, you have this idea of self-reflection. in a unique way, which is the body swaps, which I explained, that is reinforced by the behavioral data that you can capture. In VR, people speak, so you can analyze their voice, you can analyze the semantic content of what they say, and people move as well. And that gives us a lot of data to give learners actionable feedback on how to improve. And that's really a loop here of progress. And so the vision behind body swaps, our template is quite simple. You get people in VR, they practice, they observe, they make choices, they speak. Then they body swaps to watch themselves. There's just two things. The first thing is people become more aware of where they can improve. I used to ask every time we did demo face-to-face in a pre-pandemic world, I used to ask people right after the body swaps, would you change anything to what you've done, to what you've said? And out of about 300 people, a single person said that they wouldn't change anything. And that guy was a 25-year-old life guru. Everyone else, nurses, CEOs, coaches would say they learned something from watching themselves. The second effect of swapping is you build confidence. As you do it again and again, you see yourself becoming better. And that's very powerful the day you go into an interview. And the third element here is the feedback, the behavioral analytics that I mentioned. And so by seeing yourself and getting actionable feedback, you go back into practice so much better. So that's really the kind of cycle of learning that we've built. And we have applied that to our job simulator. So the job simulator is 4 modules, a total of 60 to 90 minutes, depending on how many things you want to repeat. And the first 3 modules are really about learning everything that really makes a difference. So everything that Ruth mentioned about first, you need to manage your anxiety to not stumble and be fully confident. Secondly, you need to know yourself. What do you want? What are you good at? What are the stories in your life that demonstrate that you are indeed good at what you say you're good at? And how do you connect that to the job you want? Then the car technique. How do you answer to a question you don't expect? Job interviewing, as you said, Ruth, has nothing to do with has actually little to do with how competent you are at the job. It's a storytelling exercise, and so you need to learn how to tell stories. Once you've learned all of that, you can go into the simulator itself and practice answering questions. And so I'm not going to go into the details of each module because we don't have 3 hours, but what we've built is like a Lego kit of exercises. And in each of the modules, we use those exercises in different ways. So the first one is embodiment. So in VR, you have a body. You can see you have hands, you exist. And that ownership of your virtual body is very important in terms of the emotional resonance of the experience. It's something that's happened to you. Embodiment enables us to do stuff that you wouldn't be able to do in e-learning, for example. Exercises about breathing and power poses can be done in VR. The second type of exercise is observation. So Ruth talked about behavioral modeling, studying success. And so in VR, you are, for example, going to observe Will, who is your coach, pretend to answer a question about himself to get a job in retail. And every time he says or does something that you think is good, you're going to click on the trigger of your controller. At the end of that sequence, you will have a results panel that will tell you, well, you noticed when he talked about that he's good with people, but you didn't notice when he talked about his non-negotiables. And you can revisit, like a replay of a football goal, that segment. So that's really learning by observing. The third type of exercise is what we call conversation. So that's when you make choices and you observe the consequences of that choice. That's the psychological safety, right? You can be rude to a character just to see what happens. Nothing's going to come out of it. For example, when you learn about the context action results, it's good to learn the acronyms and you will understand what it means, but really you immediately have to put it into practice. And so we put you in an exercise where you're going to have to answer questions and demonstrate that you understood how to put the context first, then the action, then the results. There's also an exercise where you are the interviewer and you ask questions to Will, and you can then decide whether to give him the job or not. The next exercise is the body swaps. It's probably what makes this platform really, really unique. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and to ask Tom to do a live demo of VR which is most likely a terrible idea because all kinds of things can go wrong. And I hope your lunch has settled because you're going to see what Tom sees, and it's going to be a bit wobbly. So I hope everyone can try it in VR. If you have a headset, I'll give you the link for a demo. But just to give you a taster, I'll give the floor to Tom. Tom, you ready?
I am ready, as I'll ever be. Yeah, so I've been nominated as the person to look a fool as they put on a VR headset. I'm going to share my screen first of all. Is that visible for everyone? Can you hear me?
All good. Yeah,
yep,
we can
good.
hear you.
Okay.
All good, Tom.
Great, fantastic. Okay, I've got a headset. This is a Quest 2, just connected to my PC for now, just to make the streaming a little bit easier. You're seeing a first-person view from my head, so as I move my head around, your screen moves around, which is why I've got to try and keep my head as steady as possible. So I'm going to go straight into the fourth module of our job interview skills content.
Hi, I'm Ashley, the hiring manager here. So glad you could make it. Let's get started. What kind of questions would you like me to ask you?
Okay, so now I have a choice of questions. There's different categories here. For a bit of fun, I'm going to go for curveballs and creative interview. These come up randomly, so I don't know the answers to all of these. So you are literally going to get an off-the-cuff answer from me.
Good luck. Here goes. Where does your boss think you are right now?
Okay, so this is a strange one to have. I'm going to have to imagine my imaginary boss doesn't know that I'm in this webinar. So I'm going to ask for a hint. And so this is a cheeky question which can only have one answer. Okay, and so they're also explaining how I can put it into the framework of context, action, and result, which was a technique that we were taught earlier in module 3. I'm going to do this off the cuff just so you get an idea of the whole kind of Bodyswaps mechanism. I'm not going to worry too much about my answer. So I think my boss probably thinks that I'm hard at work working on the latest version of Bodyswaps, and that's because I'm a very kind of, I'm very conscientious. I'm always hardworking, and people just assume that I'm working all the time. Okay, so now we're going to see that back. Oh, I changed. So I think my boss probably thinks that I'm hard at work working on the latest version of Bodyswaps, and that's because I'm a very kind of, I'm very conscientious. I'm always hardworking, and people just assume that I'm working all the time. See what I cunningly brought that round into a compliment on myself. Okay, so now I get to see some statistics about how I did. For instance, we look at your speech. You can see that I talked at 164 words per minute, which is pretty fast, but I'm quite a fast speaker. It's not too bad. I've done worse. We have some statistics on our body language. For instance, how much I move my hands. So I've moved it a fair amount, which is good. I didn't cross my arms too much, only 15%. So, it doesn't look defensive. And I'm going to look at eye contact. And I got 71% eye contact, which is good. So I'm not doing too badly. I think my confidence level has really gone up as part of this exercise. And then I could go on and be asked more questions, etc. So hopefully that gives you a good idea. And I'm going to hand back to Chris before you all feel seasick.
Thanks, Tom. On the on that note, it's important to know, like, there's no wobble in virtual reality, right? The wobble comes from the frame rate and Zoom, but in reality it's all it's all smooth. It was a really difficult question you got, very, very tricky one. And I'm not sure yet what I think about your answer, but we can talk about this after the webinar. So now that you've seen what it looks like, let's go to the field and talk to Marion, who has put the headset with those 4 modules on the heads of quite a few dozen students. Marion, can you tell us more about what you've done so far with the simulator?
Yes, for sure. So just to as a reminder, I'm the event coordinator for Antilogy. We are a consultancy immersive tech in Paris. We are a partner with Bodyswaps today, and we work on the French territory. And what we did is that we tried out the module with 3 different schools. So we took GIS to 3 different schools that we curated for a full day of face-to-face workshop for students that were volunteered. And all the students came for a 2-hour session for them to try out the module. And we curated 3 schools in Paris. There was 2 business schools and 1 more of a vocational schools. And we did that for 3 days in different parts, 2 in Paris and 1 in Bordeaux.
Great. And can you tell us more about, as a student in one of those schools, what was my day like? What was the protocol?
So basically, we decided to do a 2-hour sessions with a minimal number of participants. So the maximum that we had was 6 students, and the students had to stay and be there for 2 hours. So you arrive for 2 hours. First, there was an onboarding on the material. So there would be the Quest 2 that will last around 15 minutes, even less. We have found that most of students had really no problems in handling the Quest 2, for example. And then they would have an onboarding on the content. So that would be onboarding the applications, the 4 different modules, and what you are going to be able to get from the application as a participant. And so when all of this was done, the students would take the headsets and then just go for the exercise. And the first thing we did in preparation is that we warned them, you're going to spend a long time with the headset on. So our recommendations is that you do the module 1 and 2, then take a 15 minutes break, and then come back for module 3 and 4. And on average, a lot of students would spend an hour inside the modules, but some of them that were really immersed in the application actually spent an hour and 20 minutes into the virtual, GIS simulations.
20 minutes, yes, 70, 18 minutes. Can you, I'm going to share my screen so you can talk about the results. To give you a bit of context, at the end of each of the 4 modules, there's a little 5-question survey in virtual reality that asks about different things. But one is self-awareness. Are you becoming more aware of how you can improve? It asks about confidence to apply skills, and it asks about whether people would recommend that learning experience to their peers, which is a good measure of engagement. So I'm going to share my screen, Mario, and let you comment on what you learned in the numbers, but also beyond the numbers.
Sure, yeah, sure. So to give you a little bit context in terms of what are those results, those are the results in app, and those are answers from participants. But the answer that I'm going to give you is more about what I found about the context through informal exchange with the students at the end of their simulations. So first of all, self-awareness. In terms of self-awareness, I got a lot of those kind of feedbacks from students that upon doing these simulations and also upon practicing questions and answers, they discover things and characteristics about themselves So, for example, that would be a lot in terms of nonverbal communications. I don't know, I was moving my hands like this, or I don't know, in terms of maybe some tics in the speeches. I was saying a lot, I had a lot of hesitation, for example, but also I enjoyed the result that I had. So it's self-awareness about how I act, my attitudes towards answering questions to a recruiter, for example. And just to follow through with the next term, which is confidence, a lot of people came out of the simulation really more, they felt like they were more prepared, more confident for in the context of big interview coming soon. For example, we went to a business school, HEC, for example, that you see the logo in the left corner. One student was really aware of the theory, and she said she was preparing for a financial a job in the financial fields, and she knew that some of the questions were really coming from those fields. And she thanked us at the end because she actually spent an hour and 20 minutes into the simulation, and she said, "Thank you, I needed this so much. Now I feel more prepared. Now I feel more confident for my next interview." And so to really conclude with the last one, which is recommendations, everyone that I talked to after the simulations discovered for the first time, well, not all of them discovered VR, but all of them discovered that you could use VR for as a professional tool, and also as a tool to learn, to really practice and learn. And most of them felt like it was very, very innovative tool to use. And most of them would say, yeah, we would recommend those kind of practice, those kind of tools.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Mario. So last question for you is, the students like it, the theory behind it is hopefully strong. What about the deployment? What if you are a college or university and you haven't started really on your journey with immersive learning and with job interview in particular? Beyond job interview simulator, you've done deployments in many kinds of VR, many kinds of organizations, from tiny to huge. What do you see are common mistakes that organizations make? What would you recommend?
So in terms of how to invest in VR, or more in terms of how to organize as a good field for students to practice? I'm sorry.
I think first and foremost is what's a good reason to start VR? What's a bad reason to start VR?
Well, for students, for example, practicing is key points. I mean, in terms of theory, it's very easy. The classical format is you being in a classroom and having a teacher in front of you. But what really was a striking point for all the participants was practice. And it's actually what they appreciated the most, is that especially in the business schools, most of them were really aware about the theory. Also, all the information were not new to them, but everyone really appreciated the fact that they could practice their interview skills, the fact that they could practice their the questioning techniques, for example. And being with the VR headset and doing the simulation was creating for them a SAS, I would say, for them to freely practice it, to really be intimate with their questions, because some of the questions that are being asked is linked to your intimate position. What do you want to do in the future? What are you projecting about yourself? And so in terms of deployments, what we try to do is really to give a safe space for students to isolate themselves and being completely immersed into the headset and being able to talk freely. So ideally, I would say it's a safe position for participants, and we try to do that as much as possible, because it's a really innovative way for students to practice. And what I would advise for any kind of manager at schools or maybe career centers is, first of all, if you want to invest in virtual reality in a school, you need to try it first. You need to maybe do demonstrations have everyone in your team doing a demonstration, from the managing director to people in the career center. And maybe we could find someone that could help you to facilitate with virtual reality as a medium. We found that most participants had no problem trying out the technology, but it's you could find someone in the team that could be very reticent and resisting those technologies. So having someone facilitating is a good thing, maybe find someone externally, but also having a tech champion into the team really helps. Someone who's curious about the medium and could really push it in the right directions. It's also good to promote the uses of those medias internally, and the word of mouth could really also help. And then you test it out. You tried first with you bringing students into the test, small pool of students from different levels, because they come with their own anxiety, their own problematics, and they could actually give you answers in terms of is that what students really need as of right now, and when do they need it, and how do they want to use it, because the students will determine how the technology is being used. And then afterwards, if you get good feedbacks from the students, it's up to you as a school manager to really to try it with the implementations and find the right formats. Word of mouth always work for sure.
Thanks. Well, I take couple learnings from what you said. So the first one is the human element. And I don't remember who said that, but it's deploying VR, deploying any disruptive technologies. Like in the case of VR, is 10% hardware. I think now that's sorted. The hardware is good and cheap. 20% software. You want to get good software like Bodyswaps, but 70% human. And that is because you need indeed to manage the fleets, to do the facilitation, to attract the student, to report on success, to get buy-in. And I would always encourage organizations to not underestimate that factor. And the second element is the step-by-step. Probably shouldn't buy one headset for each student right off the bat. And building that buy-in. The good thing about VR is you get a lot of data. So building the case for it is quite easy. Thanks a lot, Marion, for this. It was very insightful, and hopefully plenty more schools very soon. I'm going to do a very short 2-minute conclusion. After that, we will take questions from the chat. So whilst I conclude, please don't hesitate to rack your brain and prepare a couple of questions. It can be for anyone on the panel, including Tom, who only did a demo, but he's our CTO, so he has a lot to say as well. And I'm going to share my screen for last couple slides, I promise. So the first one, trying to summarize what VR brings to the table in terms of job interview preparation. What it brings is it ticks a number of boxes when it comes to developing the skills that Ruth mentioned are necessary for success beyond I know what to say. And it ticks those boxes in a way that is pedagogically sound. It allows for that purposeful practice. And so to sum it up, in VR we have psychological safety. You are encouraged to make mistakes, to explore and learn from that. You have the safety, but you also have the pressure, and that really you have to have a headset on to believe it. But in VR, you feel like you're there. And so when Will asked you a question, where does your boss think you are? You feel a pressure in a very different way than if you were recording yourself on your computer and your phone. You learn to manage anxiety, to verbalize what makes you anxious. You can model behavior, so look at examples and really model what you say and how you say things after that. Importantly, there's this idea of self-awareness, changing perspective, sitting in the seat of the recruiter and say, if I were a recruiter, that's how I come across, and slowly building the confidence. And finally, it's about autonomous practice and feedback. That doesn't mean that VR is going to replace the existing mediums. It is a new tool in the box that allows for realistic experiential practice. When we talk to career centers and students, quite often, especially for resource reasons, that's how the provision looks like today. they will offer mock interviews to students on a voluntary basis. And then those students will go on to have real interviews, might be right after the mock interview, might be a few weeks or months later. With immersive learning in VR, you can have facilitated session before the mock interview. So you can have your students, learn to manage anxiety, learn who they are, what they want, how to tell how to tell stories that are compelling, so that when they come to the mock interviews, you can really make the most out of that time. The basics are covered. Now you can really fine-tune those killer answers that are going to blow the recruiters away. And then, because VR is autonomous, and because Bodyswaps is also available on PC and on mobile phone, you can practice the very morning of your interview. You want to do a power pose, you don't remember exactly how to do it, you want to practice the car technique a little bit, you want to warm yourself up with a few curveballs, you can do that wherever and whenever you need. And altogether, that new blend means that the performance of the students is going to increase, and they will really be able to present themselves and get the job that they deserve and that they are fit for. It's question time, so I will unshare my screen. Well, actually, I will leave that in the background. If you scan that QR code, you will have access to our demo, which is a demo of the fourth module, which is just a question and answer, the one that Tom showed. We have a website, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Please follow us on there if you want more news. And if you have any questions after that webinar, you can email me directly. So let's look at the chat, and if we have any question at the moment.
Chris, I think there are a couple of questions about the cost justification business case, and also on COVID risks with VR headsets, and the coverage dictated by the number of headsets available at any one time. So how many headsets do you really need to get benefits of Bodyswaps?
I can take that also if you want, but go ahead.
Yeah. No, Marion, you're a specialist in deployment, so by all means.
So I can talk a bit first about sanitarization and hygienes. You mentioned, Tom, the clean boxes that do the disinfection headsets between use. Yes, those are very good. So just to give you a little context in terms of COVID, what we had to do is that we had to completely redesign our sanitization process during the experiences. And so we created one that we, in terms of cleaning the lenses, cleaning the inside of the headsets, but also cleaning between every users of the headsets, especially if you're sharing. And what we did is we also bought clean boxes. So the clean boxes, so that's the name of the product, is disinfection tools, where you put the headsets into the boxes, and then for 1 minute, UVC light will be transmitted into the headsets. And that will really finalize the sanitization process for the headsets. So that's one possibility. But of course, it costs a lot of money, and euros. I think one of the boxes was at the time 1,000 euros. I don't know if the prices have evolved right now. I haven't got the information. My recommendation would be, of course, to be very wary of that. And what we do in terms of training is to say that grand maximum is to have small session of training, and also to have maximum 1 headset per 2 users, because then you can clean in between every users, you can clean the headsets, but also the facilitator should have cleansing gel as well in their hand every time they touch the headsets. What we also recommend for our schools is to buy what we call the hygienic mask. Is basically a protection that you put within your just here, and you can see with your eyes, of course, but it creates a cover between your skin and the headset as well. So that's the possibilities in terms of sanitizations. And then to answer the second question, which is how many headsets does a school need to get full benefit of the system? And that's not something I could really answer, because it really depends on what the teacher, how the teacher want to use the content in terms of their classes, and how do they want to implement them. For example, some schools might want to mostly have a fixated room where they have one headset, and it's a headset that never moves, and students are free to come and go and experience the module. For example, they could, for example, have a schedule and take some time, maybe 2 hours or less, and just come, do the simulation and go. But some other schools might want to get their own fleet of headsets, and in terms of how many students they want to have trained on this as well. And they could get, and it depends on the many headsets they want to use, and they might want to have other applications in it. So I don't really have the answer for that. Just so you know, we arrived every day for the 3 days. One day was we came with 15 headsets to do the demonstrations. So because we had 2 sessions that were back to back, and we were able to begin the trainings with the first session with 6, and then we didn't have to clean for the sessions that were coming afterwards. And so we did only the cleaning part during lunchtime. So, and then we use the same fleet again. So just to give you a little bit of context.
Thanks a lot, Marion. If I can echo a little bit what you said, I think between the lines, what I read, it is again about the human factor. So it's not so much about the number of headsets, it's about what human resources do you have internally to manage those. If you have a team of facilitators and a room equipped and open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day, it's completely different from if you have no one and you want to call an external partner. But when it comes to the business, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to add as well is that it really depends on how you want to apply the content. Maybe we're gonna answer this one. Do you think that the content works as an autonomous application, and that maybe students can use it on their own, or do you want to have a facilitator or a coach at the same time? And that really influences how many headsets you're gonna get at your school.
We have a few more questions in about 3 minutes. So I'm gonna do an exercise in concision that I learned through the Bodyswaps job interview simulator, and try to answer those very quickly. Starting with the easy one. Are there any plans to make this available to Pico headsets? Yes, and it's a matter of weeks, if not days. Another one was about whether we have a self-compassion module like the one I showed. I reckon, Jennifer, you mentioning the Medslater experience. We don't have one that is specific on self-compassion at the moment, but it's definitely something that we could create. First question, yeah.
Sorry, Chris, can I interrupt there? So I answered Jennifer to say, yes, we do, because in module 1, we have our self-counselling activity, which is inspired by that very thing. So.
Yes, you're right. So do you want to explain the self-counselling activity in the first module?
Yeah, sure. So the self-counselling activity we brought in because we know that part of the problem around confidence is that you have this kind of, everyone has this self-critic that kind of creates this kind of self-doubt and these kind of niggling worries. And so we were inspired by this, the model that Chris showed you, to create an activity where you can speak aloud your concerns. So you tell yourself, we have your young version of your avatar and an older version of the same character, and you speak your concerns to your older self, and then you switch bodies, and as your older self you then give yourself advice about why you don't need to be concerned about those things, and it's based on this Solomon effect, where what researchers found was that we often give better advice to other people than we would give to ourselves. So the feedback that we've had so far on this, I think some learners have found it an extremely kind of powerful experience. It can be quite emotional, but yeah, it seems to be quite well received.
Great. Thanks a lot, Ruth. I'm conscious that it's now 3 p.m. UK time, so I want to thank you all for coming. This has been recorded, so we'll take it live. Don't hesitate to send me an email, chris@bodyswaps.co, if you have any questions. And I never thought I would say that, but go England on Sunday. Bye everyone. Have a fantastic day. Thanks, Marion. Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Tom. Thanks a lot, Sabine. Bye.